risk module. You'll see here our Resolve dashboard, and this is actually our build site. And you can almost tell it's our build site as the menu on the left-hand side is in green, where our live site is in red. We can give you access to the build site, and if you just report an email to compliance and risk, will give you access to the build site so that you can play around with the module before using it in anger. So to register a risk in Resolve, we go to the risk menu on the left-hand side, and then we select risks, and it takes us into the risk module. Now, to add a risk, it's quite simple. If we just go to the add button, which you'll see at the top middle of the screen, and that then takes us into the risk. Now, risk, you should give it a brief title, just so that you can find the risk again. And I'm just going to use a simple title to identify the risk of tea bags splitting. And the source of this risk, we have several different sources of risk, but generally for yourselves, it's going to be a quality risk. So we set operational or quality risk, and then we select which service line it supplies to. And this is just a hierarchical system. So we go to the exec, and then we go down to occupier strategy and solutions, and then we'll select global portfolio solutions. So that's who the risk, where the risk sits. The date we add the risk, what's today's date, and then we give a more detailed description of what the risk is. And typically we need to consider the cause of the risk, the event that will manifestate the risk, and then the consequences. So in this case, the hazard or the cause of risk is tea bags. The cause is tea bag splitting due to poor manufacture. So that's the cause, and the consequence is leading to loose tea leaves floating in the tea. But here we have got the tea bag splitting, which is our hazard, the cause, which is poor manufacture, and then the actual consequence of the issue. We then come down and give a risk rating, what we term as native risk. And a native risk is the risk rating without anything being done to mitigate that risk, so i.e. no controls in place. So for ourselves, we feel that this is quite likely to happen. And the consequence, we go along to the consequence, and we're saying it's in this example, we're going to say it's a major consequence because this really annoys the person that buys the cup of tea. So we select that risk level. Now there are some descriptions in here. I wouldn't get too hung up on these descriptions. There is a matrix for quality which you would have had in the training, and we suggest you use and apply that matrix. We then look at what controls we have currently in place to mitigate this. So in this scenario, we're going to say quality check on tea bags out of the packet, and that's the only control that we've got. We then go down and again re-rate the controls, taking into account the effect of that mitigation measure. And in this case, we're saying it's the impact to the customer happens is still going to be the same, but we no longer think it's likely, it's possible that one could get through our quality check. So as you see here, this gives us an outcome of high and a risk score of 12. We then come down and each risk should have an owner. In this case, we can apply myself. And the risk status, it's an active risk, that's a present risk. And then we decide whether the risk is ALARP, and ALARP stands for as low as reasonably practicable. So do we think the risk could be made less than it currently is? In this case, I say it's not ALARP, so we can do further things to reduce that risk. So we then put that as complete. And that takes us to the risk record. And if you look on the left-hand side, that's a summary of the risk, and we can see it's a high risk. Now, we want to put some additional controls in place for this one. So if we then go to the tab for additional controls, we then go to the Add button. And again, give the control a general title. And in this case, we're going to switch to loose tea leaves. And so what we then look at what is the type of risk treatment. So risk treatments tend to follow several things. So avoidance of the risk, we don't do that activity in the first place. We can change the likelihood or consequence of the risk. We may share the risk with another party, or we may retain the risk. And sometimes we might take the risk in order to pursue an opportunity. So in this case, I'm reducing the likelihood. And then we give the control description. So we're going to switch to loose leaf tea and use a teapot with an internal strainer. So that's how we're going to get over that situation. We then identified what we want to do. We'll then need to assign some actions to somebody. So we go through the action module to do that. I would tend to save this first of all as a draft. And then go back in and add our actions. I'm going to add an action. I can either select an existing action if there is one, but I'm going to select an action. So I'm just going to say arrange supplier of loose leaf tea. So again, the action new supplier for loose leaf tea. Action category, what's quality? The source this is actually a risk assessment control. There's no applicable to any ISO standards, so it's not an audit. This is an improvement, not corrective. We're going to assign the action to, and then we just have some priorities. So this one, we're just going to give a medium priority. So that's been we've got 6 weeks to sort this out. We don't need a control review as this isn't an audit corrective action. Who's that action on? Again, for myself, where am I based? And the service likeness actions applicable to. So again, we go through the hierarchy to be find, and then we save that action, and then that would appear as an action there, and then we're going to complete this. So that's listed the action to implement that additional controls. And then on an annual basis, you'll get an email from Resolve asking you to do an annual risk review, and it's usually a year after this review was added to the system. So to do a risk review, we go into the annual risk review, and we add. Actually, you should do the first review straight away, and then the annual one, you'll get the email through. So once we put the risk on, we put the controls, we should do a review of the risk. Again, today's date, who's done that, and just generally, so in this case, new risk added. We've not consulted any employees on this risk, but you may have consulted employees if it's a health and safety risk, or that you may have consulted other people. So employees will be on the drop-down list. Other people, it's just a free text that you can complete. As it's an initial first-time review, I'm not changing the status of the risk. I'm not changing the priorities, and any actions identified? Well, yes, I've identified some actions, but I've already put them on the action tab, additional controls tab, so I'll say no. If this was the annual review and we wasn't putting any on the control tab, we may put additional actions and select. So again, this is complete. And what this will do, if I refresh, it would change the review stage to complete. So that risk's already set up now. And in a year's time, it will ask you to do another review. And simply to do that, you simply click on the add button to add another review for this coming year. There's also a notes section if you did want to put any notes. Again, that's not a compulsory part of it. Generally, for a quality process, you normally expect 2 to 3 risks. There is no right or wrong number. It's just around finding those single points of failure and then identifying the risks associated with them. For instance, in our control summary, we may have already implemented a documented procedure, or there may be a policy around the controls. And again, that's something we would already have included in our control summary. Or if there isn't a policy or procedure in place, or we decided we need to have one, then you'd put that as an additional control. So you'd simply add an additional control and then go through that whole process again. And that's all there is to that module. And if you go back once that risk has been added, you can see on the register your risk, spectrum T-bag, description, whether it's native, summary of the controls in place, the residual risk that's left. Is it not ALARP? Now, we said no, but when we come to do our review, we would go in and obviously update that if it's now as low as it possibly could be. And we'll do that in conjunction with doing another risk review. And we'll see here the date the risk was last review and status and through the service line. Now you can export this risk register for your own risks, and you just hit the export button at the top, and that will then give you a CSV file. Okay, that's all there is to the module. Thank you.